Hey guys, JK Wargames. So today we're looking at how to play Scream Aim Fire. It's designed by myself and it's published by Tiny Battle Publishing. So for those of you who have the game already, thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying it. This video is aimed at helping anyone who's not quite sure on some of the rules. Hopefully this will clear things up for you. So I'm going to go through how to set up a game, and how actions, orders, and how the game plays basically. So before setting up a game, once you've laid the map out, you're going to want to shuffle the cover cards, the action cards and the reserve cards and put them at the top of the map. You're then going to want some containers or a cup, first of all for your tank hit counters, your infantry damage counters, your tank damage counters, and then you're going to want a container for normal German infantry and veteran German infantry. So on the map we have marked hexes, and this indicates where we set up these units depending on the scenario we're playing. So we're going to just do an example of scenario 1. So in scenario 1, the Americans start with 2 M4 Sherman tanks. So we're going to place 2 of these. Now there's actually 3 marked hexes for M4 Sherman tanks on map 1. So you can choose where you want both of them to go. So I'm going to put the first one here in this marked hex. My second M4 tank is going to go behind the woods in this marked hex. And the last unit is a mortar. So we place down the mortar unit. We would then place our American infantry, which we'll do in a second. We'll just do the marked hexes for the Germans. So as you can see, they've got 2 Panzer IV marked hexes and an MG42 team. So let's go ahead and place them. We have a Panzer IV counter. It's going in its marked hex. Second one goes in its marked hex. And then the dreaded MG42 team goes in the woods in its marked hex. There are no German infantry in scenario 1 that start on the board, start on the map. They will arrive via the red hex on an enemy spotted check. So we don't need to worry about those for the minute. However, American infantry are on the board at the start of scenario 1. So in scenario 1, you have 3 infantry, standard infantry, and 3 veterans. So as you can see here, we've got 2 different types. So we've got veteran and infantry. Veterans are harder to hit. Infantry are easier to hit. Veterans get a +1 on their dice roll modifier because they're more experienced. Now how this works is you can choose any counter you want. So what I tend to do is go in number order. So if I've got 3 standard infantry, I'll choose 1, 2 and 3 of the infantry, and then 3 veterans, I'll go 4, 5, 6 with veterans using the ID number here. So we have our infantry counters ready to place on the map, and we also get a first lieutenant. Now he has to be attached to 1 unit, and I'm going to select veterans with an ID of 10, and they're going with the first lieutenant. So they have to stay together. So we'll place them first. And in the first scenario, you can set up American units anywhere in the second row in any hex. So this second row. So 1, 2, into the second, anywhere along there. The veterans and the first lieutenant are going to start there. And then I'll just place my other units where I see fit. So I'm going to space them out a bit. I want these veterans down here. And then I'm going to put those in there, because remember, you can stack. You can have 2 counters in 1 hex. And that is how we set up our units. We then want our morale score counter on 0 at the top. You then want your German reserve counter on 0, and then your game turn counter on turn 1. So before we start the game, I'm going to talk about line of sight. So line of sight is quite simple. If we wanted to trace line of sight to this MG42 team from these veterans, we can't. We have to trace a line from our centre hex into their centre hex, and if there's any intervening terrain on the way, it blocks line of sight. So this woods is blocking line of sight to the MG42 team. Pretty simple. So they cannot see the MG42 team. The MG42 team cannot see them. However, if they're adjacent to each other, then the veterans can see the MG42 team and the MG42 team can see the veterans. Pretty simple. It's just a case of things blocking line of sight. So MG42 team in the building, they can see them in the building because they're not behind a building. If they were trying to trace line of sight through, again, it's blocking line of sight, so they can't do it. However, if they're in the building, they can trace line of sight to the building and fire at them. Pretty simple. If we look at hills, let's bring the camera over. If we look at hills, which are marked as brown, the center of a hill is at a higher level, and these hexes surrounding it are a lower level. So if I'm here, let's use the veteran unit again. If I'm at the bottom of this hill and the MG42 team are over here, I can't see them because I'm on the same level. I can't trace line of sight. However, if I'm in the center of a hill hex, I'm a higher level now, and I could trace line of sight through to these guys. Because I'm higher, I can see over the woods and through to there. However, if they're in the woods there, I can't see these guys because the woods are protecting them. We can't spot them from the woods, even though we're a higher level. So it's always a case of a higher level, you can see over into a hex. If they're here, we still can't see them because the woods is protecting them. But if our guy is adjacent to them, they can always see them. So pretty simple. So the first part of the American turn is an enemy spotter check, and we only do this if there are 5 or less German units on the map, including MG42 teams. So at the start of scenario 1, we have 3 units. We have 2 Panzer IVs and an MG42. So we need to roll on that enemy spotted table. You roll a d6 and then consult the chart. So for this example, we're going to roll a 1. That brings in 3 German infantry units. So I go to my container or cup that we set up earlier and select 3 infantry units at random. So I've selected 3. We have this infantry unit with ID 1. We have infantry unit with ID 3 and infantry unit with ID 15. Now what we need to do is roll to see where these guys come in, and we always use the red reinforcement hex. So the reinforcement hex has a 1 in the middle. It then has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and X. So what we do is we take our first infantry unit and we roll a d6. We've rolled a 5, so he goes into space 5, which is this hex here. That's where he sets up. We then take our next German infantry. We roll a 6, so that's this hex, because this hex is number 6, so he sets up there. And our last guy is a 1, so he sets up in the center of the hex. Now, if we had units in the same hex, so if 2 of these were stacked, we got the same result, and we get another result that would put a unit in there, we can't we would go over our stacking limit. So you use the X and you'd place him there. And if you can't place it in the X, you'd place it in the next lowest number. And that's how our guys come in. Pretty simple. Now, if you roll on the enemy spotted table and you get a bad result, you're going to get 5 infantry, 3 veterans. You do get a lot of units coming in. And again, remember, you can have 2 units in any one hex. And remember, you only roll an enemy spotted check if there are 5 or less units. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units, 6 German units. So that's the first part of the American turn. We now go to the order phase. So the order phase is like the heart of the game. You're going to roll 5d6, and these dice are going to tell you what orders you can issue to your guys. There is an optional rule called We Are Surrounded, where you can roll 6d6 if there are more German units than American units. But for this example, we're just staying with 5 dice. So we're going to roll our 5 dice. I roll them here, and that's a pretty good roll. So 5, 2 4s, and a 6. So you look at the table. On a 1, we can attach a medic. We don't have a 1. A 2 lets an infantry unit move or fire. A 3 lets an infantry a 3 lets an infantry move and fire. 2 4s let us conduct a mortar fire. We have 2 4s here, so we're definitely going to go ahead and do that. A 5 lets us activate a tank, and they can either move or fire. So we can activate 2 tanks because we've got 2 5s. A single 6, we can either do covering fire or sniper fire. We don't have a sniper in the first scenario, so we're not going to use that. So potentially this 6 will be lost. However, you can change 1 dice per turn to a higher or lower. So let's say this 5, I could either put this down to a 4, or I could go up to a 6. So what I'm actually going to do is change this dice, Okay, so I'm actually going to change one of these 4s to a 3. And the reason being, I want to show you some infantry moving and firing. So we're not going to do mortar fire, but I will show how that works. So the 4 is going to be lost because we always need 2 4s for mortar fire. So we can activate an infantry unit to move and fire, 2 tank units, and a single 6 we can do covering fire. So we're going to take the 3 and activate one of our infantry units. So I think the first infantry unit we'll activate will be these guys here, and they have 4 movement points. Now, movement, they can move up to 4 clear hexes in the open. So there's no terrain here. So he could move 1, 2, 3, 4. Moving into a woods costs 2. So if he started here, he'd go 1, 2, 3. To move into a building costs 3 points. So if he was here, he could go 3 into the building. He can't move anymore because it would cost him more to get out. So for our actual move, he's going to move 4 in the open. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Because he's trying to get to this objective. Now, he can fire, and they have a range of 3. Infantry and veteran units have a range of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're not in range, so he can't fire. But for this example, we'll just say this guy is in range. So he's 1, 2, 3. So he's definitely in range. He can now fire at him. So the first thing we do is draw a cover card. Even though this American unit is in a clear hex, we still draw a cover card. So I draw a cover card, and we're going to read the clear hex part of the card. There are 2 parts, clear hex and a cover hex. If he was in woods or a building, we'd use this part. But we've got clear hex, no cover. So they're not benefiting from any cover at all. So it's just a straight up roll. German infantry are hit on a 4+. We roll a single d6. We get a 6, which is an automatic hit. He's hit, he's removed from the game, and we then draw from our damaged infantry damage counters. I draw, and this is the result. Damage +5. So we get 5 points on our morale. So the morale moves up to 5. And in the first scenario, you're trying to get to 40 points. And remember, morale can go up or down. So he's activated. We would flip him over to say he's been activated. Now bear in mind, I'm playing with the print and play version here. I'm still waiting for my copies to arrive because I am in the UK and Tiny Battle Publishing are in America. So that was our infantry. Nice result. I now have 2 tanks, so I'm going to activate this tank first. Now an M4 Sherman has a range of 5 hexes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he's not in range. However, he can move as an action and he can move 2 hexes. So he's going to go 1, 2, like that. And that's him done. You can never activate the same unit twice. Our other 5, we're going to activate our tank behind the woods. Again, he's definitely not in range. So he's going to move 2. 1, 2. He's done. And the single 6 would let us do a covering fire action. The covering fire is if these guys were like this unit could fire, and then the adjacent unit could move up to their movement allowance, but not if the unit's already acted. So we can't do that with any of our guys. So that is our turn over. So we eliminated 1 German infantry unit, not too bad. We then move in to the German turn. So the first thing you're going to do is adjust any German units that are panicked. None of them are. And a unit becomes panicked from either an action card or if they're within 2 hexes of an American tank. None of them are at the moment. Anyone with a low supply marker we'd remove. Remove the low supply marker, no one is, so we're all good. So we're going to draw an action card for each of the infantry. So we're going to choose this guy here first, and we're going to draw an action card. And at the moment, our infantry are calm. So they're going to use the first part of this card. And you can see it says move up to 2 hexes, change to alert. Now, if we look at the ID on this infantry, he has an ID of 3. If there is a 3 on the board, that is who they're going to move towards. That's their main priority. There happens to be infantry 3 here. So he is moving 2 hexes towards his target. So he moves 1, 2. And the card also says change to alert. So we place an alert counter on that infantry unit, and that's their turn done. They did not fire, so they don't go low on ammo. However, if they'd done a fire action, they would have gone low on ammo. Next turn, they'll be alert, and we'll use this part of the card. And if we were panicked, we would use this part of the card. So that's done. We then choose our next infantry, which is this guy here. We're going to draw an action card. Just grab it. So here we are. They're calm, remember, because they haven't been fired on. If a German unit is fired upon, they become alert, or they become alert from an action card. So we have move up to 1 hex, fire if in range, change to alert if unit fired. So this guy has his ID of 15. There is no American ID of 15 on the board. So his priority is to go for the closest unit, the closest veteran unit first. There are no veteran units that are close to him. the closest unit to him is this infantry unit. So he's going to move towards them. And he's only moving 1 hex. He moves there. He can't fire because he's only got a range of 3. So he does nothing else. He stays calm. And that is the end of his turn. Now, after all infantry have activated, we go to MG42 teams. This German MG42 is now going to activate. MG42 teams never move. They stay in position and fire at the closest target, again using the priority chart. In this case, the closest target, not in cover, is this infantry. They would go for veterans in cover because they want to get rid of veterans, they're a good unit. However, he's going to fire at this infantry. He has a range of 6 printed on him. 1, 2, 3, 4. So he's going to fire. Now MG42 teams use 2d6 and they pick the highest result. This unit's not in cover, so they're just going to be hit on a 4+. If he was in a building, he would get a +2 to that. So 4, 5, 6. They would need a 6 to hit him, but he's not. If he was in the woods and they had line of sight, they would need a 5 to hit him because it provides +1 cover. And you never draw cover cards for Germans shooting at Americans. So the MG42 team need a 4. They're rolling 2 dice to pick the highest. They've rolled 2 3s, so they've missed. For this example, we're going to say rolled a 5. The infantry have been hit. When an American infantry or veteran unit takes their first hit, they become alert. So we place an alert counter on them. The second time they receive a hit, they receive a panic counter. And if they are hit while they have a panic counter, they are removed from the game. Now, if an American unit is destroyed in the game, we lose -5 morale and we go back down to 0. You can lose 10 or 15 depending on the situation. If you lost a first lieutenant or you lost in close combat. So that's the MG42 done, but we'll say you missed for this example, so this guy is fine. We then activate both German tanks. German tanks are always the last units to activate. And German tanks will shoot at the nearest tank if in range. So we'll look at this guy. A Panzer IV has a range of 5 hexes. 1, 2, 3, 4. He's well in range of this tank, so he's going to fire. And how this works is we draw a hit counter from our pots. And we draw. And we get a icon like this, a crosshair icon. This means a hit has been secured on the tank. So now my American tank must make a save, and it's on a front armor, so we need a 5. So we're going to roll our dice and we rolled a 4, so we do not save the shot. So then we have to draw a damage counter for the tank, and I draw, and this is what I've drawn. Destroyed and 10 morale. So our tank is destroyed, we lose 10 morale, we're on 5, so we go 0, we can't go below 0. If we were on 10, we go back down to 0. So not a great result there. However, if that tank drew a 2 crosshair icons, if I can find them, if they drew 2 crosshair icons like this, that means I'd have to use my side armor. So instead of a 5, I'd have to roll a 6. And if we make our armor save, then obviously we don't draw a damage counter and our tank lives to fight another day. So we go up to this tank here. He's not in range of this guy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If he's not in range, he will move 1 hex. German tanks only move 1 hex. So he moves 1 hex towards his target. And that completes the German turn. One thing I didn't do though is anytime an American unit is destroyed, you need to move the German reserve counter up by 1. So as you can see, we've moved it up by 1. In the first scenario, if it reaches 30, German reserves will come in, and then you draw a German reserve card and you place those units via the red hex. So that's the first turn. We then change to turn 2. So the first things the Americans would do is an enemy spotted check. So we count the units on the table. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If there are 5 or less units, we roll on that table. So again, we'd roll, we've got 3, we'd bring in more infantry. For this example, I'm not going to do that. So let's have a look at when a German unit is alert. So you can see this German infantry unit or alert. So when we draw an action card for them, we're going to use the alert part of the card. So they have fire if in range, move up to 2 hexes, assault if possible. So what this means is, first of all, they're going to fire if they're in range. So they have 1, 2, 3. They're in range. They are going for ID 3, which are there, so they will fire. If they couldn't fire, they would then move up to 2 hexes. They will assault if possible after their move. So you always try and follow what you do in red. So they fire. If they fire, then they're not going to move up to 2 hexes. So they fire. If they can't fire, they'll move up to 2 hexes, and after they've moved, they will assault if possible. But in this case, they're going to fire. So it'd be the same thing. They're firing at this infantry unit here. They need a 4+. The infantry unit are in the open. They roll a d6. They score a 3. They missed. So pretty simple. Now, let's say this tank was here. That's 1, 2. They are within 2 hexes. So this unit automatically changes to panicked, like this. And then when they draw a card, they will use panic, move up to 2 hexes. So they're in a panic state. They're going to move 2 hexes towards their target. And they'd end up there in a panic state. And then the American could get the advantage and assault them while they're in a panic state, and they stand more of a chance of knocking them out. So that's how alert actions work. Let's have a look at assaults. So assaulting, Americans can assault if they have 2 1s on their order dice. And they can only assault if they're adjacent to a unit. So this American unit can assault into here. We're using the 2 1s to do so, so they're assaulting them. They go into the hex and they roll 4d6, and they need a total score of 14, but there are modifiers. And the modifiers are, if we have a first lieutenant, we get a +1. Well, we don't. If we're a veteran, we get a +1, but we don't. And then cover would come into it. So if the Germans were in a woods, we'd have a -1 on our result. If they were in a building, we'd have a -2. If the enemy were low on a supply, we get a +1. And if the enemy were panicked, we get a +1. So earlier we said about panicked. Let's say this unit is panicked. So we're getting a +1 on our result. So we roll the 4 dice and we've scored 11, 12, 13, 14, +1 for that unit being panicked is 15. That wipes out that unit because we need a score of 14. So the German unit is removed and we score 10 morale points from an assault. So we don't draw an infantry damage counter in assaults, we just move our morale score up by 10. And in if that assault didn't work, if we failed to beat the Germans, we'd be pushed back into our hex like this and stay there. However, if the Germans assault us and they failed, they would be destroyed and we'd gain 10 morale. So it's always a risk for Germans to assault you. And Germans will assault if they if they're told to by their action card. They won't just assault, it's always done by an action card. So let's have a look at how the first lieutenant effects play. So we got these veterans here, and we've got our first lieutenant attached to them. So the first lieutenant is encouraging his men to do so. So what he's going to do, they're going to fire at the Germans. They need a 4+. The Germans are in the open. Veterans get a +1 to their die roll because they're a well-trained unit. The lieutenant adds another +1. So they've actually got a +2 on their die roll. So we need a 4+. We roll the dice, we scored a 3, but we add 2 to it. So we've actually scored a 5 and eliminated that unit. So a first lieutenant really does encourage his units to perform better. This unit, because they're adjacent to the first lieutenant, they'd also get the +1 modifier as well. So you can really start getting some good modifiers for firing. So in the first scenario, you were trying to capture the objective hex and get to a morale score of 40. And you have 12 turns to do it. The minute you have 40 morale points and you have a unit, veterans or infantry, in the objective hex, the game ends, regardless of the turn you're on. You've won. If you get to turn 12 and you've still not met 40 morale points and the objective, it's a German victory. So it can be very tense. You could have 35 morale and an objective, but then a unit gets knocked out and your morale goes back down and you've got no chance. So it really does provide tense gameplay. So let's have a look at mortar fire quick. So a mortar unit never moves, it stays in its marked hex. A mortar unit can only fire at a unit it has in line of sight. So if this guy was over here, they have line of sight to him. Regardless of range, they can fire. If they can't see a unit, the first lieutenant can spot for them. So if our first lieutenant was here, he can see this unit. He's spotted for the mortar unit. They can now attempt to range in. And to range in, you just need a 3+ on a d6. They roll a 6, so they're ranged in. The mortar unit rolls 2d6 and chooses the highest result. So we know this unit are a 4+. They roll 2 dice and they've missed. But let's say he rolled a 6. He's hit that unit. They're destroyed automatically, and you don't need to draw a damage counter. You just automatically gain morale off of mortar fire. So mortar fire is very good for taking out infantry that are piled up. So your first lieutenant can spot for you and you can just keep dropping mortars in. So they're very effective to use. So let's talk about supply counters. So for every 2 German units you destroy, you gain a supply counter. So if you destroy a German infantry and a German tank, you gain a supply counter. Now, supply counter can be used to supply an American unit that's low on ammo. So low on ammo marker is one of these. And an American unit, if they roll a natural 1 when firing, they go low on ammo. And the unit would receive that. They cannot fire, move, they can't do anything. So they're in real trouble. We can then use the supply counter as if we were going to activate this unit. We use the supply counter and remove that. And these guys are back in the fight. So you really need to keep track of every 2 German units destroyed, you gain supply counters. The other thing, if an American unit is panicked, it can't move, but it can fire with a -1 dice roll modifier. Because they're panicked, they're in a panic state. They're not as good as they were. So those are the basics of gameplay. We also get surprise unit. So at the end of turn 3 onwards, you're going to roll to see if a German surprise unit comes in. So at the end of the German's turn, you roll a dice. On the roll of a 6, a surprise unit will come in. You then roll on a 1 to 3, a German AT gun will come in, and this will target your American tanks. On a 4 to 6, you're going to get an infantry unit, and the infantry unit's job is to capture the first lieutenant. So their priority becomes moving towards the first lieutenant and trying to capture him. So you really need to think about where your first lieutenant is going. Also, if a unit with a first lieutenant is fired upon, you need to roll a dice, and on the roll of a 1, your lieutenant is killed and you lose 15 morale points. It's that brutal, so you really need to try and take care of your first lieutenant. So this is just a very simple look at how the game plays. I hope I've answered most of your questions. There are other parts, but I can't go through the whole rule book because this would be, you know, over an hour long, 2 hours, which is too long. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment and like the video. Let me know how you're getting on with the game and what you think of it. I'm always happy to answer questions on Board Game Geek as well. So guys, thanks a lot. This has been How to Play Scream Aim Fire, and I'll see you in the next video.